Over 2,000 years ago, the world was a vastly different place. In the heart of the ancient world, a city was built that would change human history. Scholars traveled thousands of miles to reach it, because inside this city stood something extraordinary, the greatest library the world had ever known. Thousands of years of knowledge, hundreds of thousands of scrolls, science, philosophy, medicine. The brightest minds of the ancient world gathered here, and ships arriving in the city carried something valuable: books. Every single one was a treasure to be possessed by the city. They copied every piece of knowledge they could find. The goal of this massive institution was simple and profound: to collect all the knowledge in the world. But then, tragedy struck the very heart of Alexandria. Something went terribly wrong, changing the course of history forever. One day, a single spark would ignite the end of a golden era. The greatest library in history began to disappear. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls. In an instant, thousands of years of human thought vanished into the air, and with them, the deepest secrets of the ancient world were silenced. Knowledge the world may never recover. So what really happened in those final, smoke-filled moments? Who destroyed the Library of Alexandria? And what knowledge was lost forever? This is a story that has haunted scholars and historians for generations. It is the mystery of the lost Library of Alexandria. To understand the greatest library ever built, we must first understand the city where it was born. It was in the year 331 BC. A young conqueror had already changed the ancient world. His armies had defeated the Persian Empire, creating one of the largest empires in history. But Alexander wanted more than conquest. He wanted to build a city that would connect the cultures of the ancient world. And here, in the heart of Egypt, he founded a city that would carry his name, the legendary city of Alexandria. Within just a few short decades, ships from across the Mediterranean began arriving here. Merchants brought gold, spices, and something even more valuable. They brought the gift of knowledge. Philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists gathered here. Alexandria quickly became a beacon of learning, the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Some of history's greatest thinkers studied here, but something even greater was being imagined. Alexander's successors had a bold idea. They wanted to build something never attempted before, a place that would collect every piece of knowledge on Earth. And right here, in this very city, the greatest library in human history was about to be created. But Alexander the Great would never see the future of Alexandria. After the sudden death of the great conqueror, one of his generals took control of Egypt. This ambitious general was known as Ptolemy, and he had a vision that was unlike anything the world had seen. Ptolemy believed power did not come from armies alone. True power came from knowledge, and knowledge could change the future of civilizations. So Ptolemy made a decision. He would build the greatest center of learning on Earth, a place where scholars could gather from every corner of the ancient world. But the goal was far more ambitious. This would not be an ordinary library. It would contain the knowledge of the entire world, gathering the profound wisdom of Greece, to the ancient secrets of Egypt, and the vast records of the Persian Empire, and discoveries from every civilization known to mankind. Philosophy, science, medicine, mathematics, all collected in one place. And soon, the vision became a reality. The Library of Alexandria was born. It would become the greatest archive of knowledge in human history. But collecting knowledge on this scale required extraordinary methods, and soon, the policy took full effect. The rulers of Alexandria would create one of the strangest policies in history, a rule that forced every ship entering the city to surrender every book on board. The Library of Alexandria was not just another place for books. It was the most ambitious knowledge project the ancient world had ever attempted. Historians believe the library held an astonishing number of manuscripts. Some estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of scrolls, possibly between 400,000 and 700,000. For the ancient world, this was an unimaginable collection. Inside these scrolls were discoveries in mathematics, early observations of the stars and the movements of planets, medical texts that described the human body in surprising detail, philosophers debating questions about life and the nature of reality, and maps attempting to explain the geography of the world. The library collected ideas from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Scholars translated texts from many languages into Greek. They copied manuscripts so knowledge could spread across civilizations. The collection continued to grow year after year. Every new discovery, every new book, was added to the archive. For centuries, Alexandria became the center of learning. The brightest minds of the ancient world came here to study, and the rulers of Alexandria were proud of what they had created. But they wanted the library to become even greater. They wanted every piece of knowledge they could find, every scroll, every book, every discovery. And to achieve this goal, the rulers of Alexandria were willing to do something unusual, a policy that would surprise travelers from across the world, a rule that forced ships entering the city to surrender every book on board, because in Alexandria, knowledge had become the most valuable treasure on earth. And soon, this strange rule would transform the Library of Alexandria into the greatest collection of knowledge the world had ever seen. As the Library of Alexandria grew, its rulers faced an enormous challenge. How could they gather knowledge from across the entire ancient world? The answer they created was surprisingly bold. Every ship entering Alexandria was carefully inspected, and if books were found on board, they were immediately taken by the authorities. The manuscripts were sent directly to the Library of Alexandria. There, scholars began carefully examining each text. Teams of scribes copied every single manuscript, working day and night to reproduce the knowledge inside them. But the most surprising part of this policy came next. The original manuscripts remained in the library. The traveler received only the copied version. In other words, Alexandria kept the original knowledge, and this strategy worked remarkably well. The collection grew faster than any library in history. Every new text was cataloged and preserved. Knowledge flowed into Alexandria from every corner of the Mediterranean: philosophy, science, engineering, and literature. Soon the library contained more knowledge than any place on earth. But this extraordinary collection created a new question. What discoveries were hidden inside those manuscripts, and what knowledge might still be waiting inside them? Because the Library of Alexandria had become the greatest storehouse of human knowledge, and inside these halls, some of the greatest scholars in history would begin making discoveries. Discoveries that would change how humanity understood the world. The secrets of the cosmos and the laws of nature were all gathered here, in the heart of Alexandria. A beacon of light in the ancient world that still fascinates us today. But what happened to this wealth of knowledge? And how much of it was lost to time forever? We begin our exploration in the next chapter. But the true power of the Library of Alexandria was not the scrolls themselves. It was the extraordinary minds who came here to study them. From across the ancient world, brilliant thinkers traveled to Alexandria because nowhere else on earth had access to so much knowledge. One of the most famous scholars connected to Alexandria was Euclid. His work would shape the study of mathematics for thousands of years. His book, Elements, became one of the most influential texts in history. Even today, many principles of geometry still come from Euclid's ideas. But Euclid was only one of many brilliant minds here. Another extraordinary scholar was Eratosthenes. He was a mathematician, astronomer, and geographer, and he made one of the most surprising discoveries of the ancient world. Eratosthenes noticed something unusual about sunlight. In one Egyptian city, the sun shone straight down into a well, but in Alexandria, the same sunlight created a shadow. This difference gave him a brilliant idea. By measuring the angle of the shadow and calculating the distance between the two cities, he estimated the circumference of the earth, and his estimate was astonishingly accurate, using only shadows, geometry, and careful observation. This was the kind of knowledge that flourished in Alexandria. The library was more than a collection of books. It was a place where ideas collided and discoveries were born. Here, mathematics, science, and philosophy evolved together. But despite all this knowledge, the Library of Alexandria would not last forever, and one day, the knowledge gathered by these brilliant minds would face a terrible threat. A moment in history that may have destroyed humanity's greatest collection of knowledge. The loss of this archive would change the course of human history. Centuries of work, gone in a single catastrophe. What mysteries were lost that we may never recover? The end of the ancient world's most ambitious intellectual project. A silence that would last for 1,000 years. But what exactly was hidden inside the Library of Alexandria? Most of its scrolls have vanished from history, and with them, entire chapters of human knowledge. Some historians believe it held lost works of Greek philosophy, texts written by thinkers whose ideas shaped the ancient world. Many of those writings may never have survived beyond Alexandria. Other scrolls may have described early engineering inventions, devices designed to lift heavy stones or move massive structures, technologies that might have changed construction forever. Some scrolls contain detailed maps of the ancient world, attempts to chart lands that were barely understood. These maps helped travelers navigate unknown seas. Other scrolls described early medical knowledge, treatments for diseases and observations about the human body, knowledge about plants, remedies, and surgical techniques. In Alexandria, science, philosophy, and medicine were deeply connected. Each scroll represented years of observation and discovery. Together, they formed the greatest archive of knowledge ever created. But most of that knowledge disappeared, and we may never know what was truly written inside those scrolls. Discoveries that could have changed history. Perhaps even knowledge that could have transformed the future. If those scrolls had survived, human history might have developed very differently. But the greatest mystery still remains. What exactly caused the destruction of the Library of Alexandria? And who was responsible? In the heart of the ancient world, there stood a monument to human curiosity, the Great Library of Alexandria. A sanctuary for all the world's knowledge. For centuries, it held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, from poetry to astronomy. The greatest minds of antiquity gathered here to unlock the secrets of the universe. It was the intellectual capital of the world, a beacon of light in an era of mystery. But knowledge this vast often invites great tragedy. Whether by war or neglect, the library was lost to the ashes of time. With it, centuries of history and discovery vanished forever. Today, only whispers and fragments of its grandeur remain, a reminder that while empires fall, the quest for knowledge is eternal. For decades, the Library of Alexandria remained the center of human knowledge. Scholars studied its manuscripts, and discoveries continued to grow. But history was about to take a dangerous turn. A powerful figure from Rome had arrived in Egypt. His name was Julius Caesar. By this time, Caesar was one of the most powerful men in the Roman world. In 48 BC, his conflict with Egyptian rulers brought war to Alexandria. The city soon became the center of a violent struggle for power. This conflict would become known as the Siege of Alexandria. During the chaos, Caesar made a desperate decision. To prevent enemy ships from capturing the harbor, he ordered the ships in the harbor to be burned. But the flames did not stay confined to the ships. The fire spread through warehouses and nearby structures, and soon, large parts of the harbor district were burning. The fire started by Caesar was only the beginning of a long and tragic story. The fires of the Siege of Alexandria shocked the ancient world. Warehouses, ships, and parts of the harbor district had burned. But did those flames reach the Library of Alexandria? For centuries, many people believed Julius Caesar was responsible. Some ancient writers claimed the fire destroyed thousands of scrolls. They believed manuscripts stored near the harbor were lost in the flames, because parts of the library's collection may have been stored near the docks. And if those storage buildings burned, thousands of manuscripts could have vanished overnight. But many historians believe the story is not that simple. Evidence suggests the main library may have survived the fire. Records from later centuries still mention scholars working in Alexandria. If the entire library had been destroyed, it is unlikely these academic activities would have continued. This disagreement has puzzled historians for centuries. Some sources blame Caesar for the destruction. Other sources suggest the library survived the siege. This suggests that at least part of the library remained intact. Perhaps some collections were destroyed, while others survived, a partial loss rather than a complete catastrophe. But if Caesar did not destroy the library completely, then what truly caused its disappearance? The answer may lie in centuries of conflict and change, because the fall of the Library of Alexandria may not have been a single event, but a gradual decline that unfolded across generations. If Julius Caesar did not completely destroy the library, then the story of its disappearance becomes far more complex, because the fall of the Library of Alexandria did not happen in a single moment. Instead, it may have unfolded gradually over many generations. Over the centuries, the city faced growing political instability. Empires rose and fell, and rulers frequently changed. Under Roman rule, Alexandria remained important, but the support that once sustained the great library began to weaken. Manuscripts were lost, damaged, or simply never replaced. Wars repeatedly struck the city, and each conflict brought new destruction. Libraries, temples, and learning centers suffered during these struggles. Over time, fewer scholars came to study in Alexandria. The great intellectual community slowly began to fade. At the same time, religious tensions began to rise. Old traditions and new beliefs often clashed violently. These conflicts sometimes targeted centers of learning. As tensions grew, many scholars began leaving Alexandria. Some manuscripts were taken elsewhere for safety. Others were simply lost over time. Little by little, the great library faded from history, and yet historians still cannot point to a single moment of destruction. No single fire, no single battle, no single ruler. The loss of the Library of Alexandria may have been a slow and silent tragedy, a decline that unfolded across centuries, rather than a single catastrophic day. But one of the most dramatic chapters in this story was still yet to come. By the 4th century, Alexandria had entered a new and turbulent era. The Roman Empire was changing, and so was the city itself. Christianity was rising rapidly across the empire. In Alexandria, Christian leaders were gaining powerful influence, but the city still had strong traditions of pagan scholarship. For centuries, philosophers had studied ancient Greek ideas here. Their teachings were closely tied to the old pagan traditions. As Christianity expanded, tensions between these groups began to grow. Religious disagreements often turned into public conflict. Many pagan institutions started losing protection from political leaders. Some temples and learning centers were eventually shut down, and the intellectual world that once thrived in Alexandria began to fracture. Centers of learning slowly lost their scholars, and valuable manuscripts were no longer carefully preserved. Some historians believe these conflicts damaged Alexandria's intellectual institutions. Knowledge that had survived for centuries began disappearing. Some scholars tried to preserve what they could. Others carried manuscripts away to safer places. But the great intellectual center of Alexandria was fading. The world that created the Library of Alexandria was disappearing. And with it, the knowledge collected across centuries. Yet the story of the library's destruction was still not finished. Because another dramatic chapter in the mystery of Alexandria was still to come. Because another dramatic chapter in the mystery of Alexandria was still to come. Because another dramatic chapter in the mystery of Alexandria was still to come. Because another dramatic chapter in the mystery of Alexandria was still to come. By the 7th century, Alexandria had already changed dramatically. A new power was rising across the Middle East. Arab armies were rapidly expanding beyond the Arabian Peninsula. In the year 642 CE, those forces reached Alexandria. The city eventually fell after months of conflict, and Alexandria came under new rule. This moment created another theory about the fate of the library. Some later stories claim that many books still remained in the city. According to these accounts, thousands of scrolls survived earlier conflicts, and these manuscripts supposedly faced a final decision. One controversial story claims the remaining books were burned. According to the legend, the manuscripts were used as fuel for city bathhouses, a story repeated in later historical writings. But historians quickly noticed a serious problem. These accounts appeared hundreds of years after the conquest itself. There are no reliable records from the time of the conquest describing such an event. Because of this, many historians doubt the story entirely. By the time the Arab armies arrived, the great Library of Alexandria may have already disappeared, lost slowly over centuries of conflict and change. So the Arab conquest remains only one possible chapter in a much larger mystery, a mystery that historians are still trying to understand. Because the real tragedy of Alexandria may not be how the library was destroyed, but everything humanity lost when it vanished. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was more than the loss of a building. It may have been the loss of centuries of human knowledge gathered from civilizations across the ancient world. Among those scrolls may have been remarkable scientific discoveries, observations about the universe that scholars were only beginning to understand, mathematical ideas that might have advanced science much earlier. Some scrolls may have described early technologies, machines and inventions that could have transformed engineering, technologies that may have been lost before they were fully understood. The library also preserved powerful philosophical works, texts exploring questions about ethics, knowledge, and the nature of reality. Ideas that shaped how people understood the world. Medical knowledge may have been lost as well. Treatments and observations about the human body. Together, these manuscripts formed a vast network of human understanding. And when they finally disappeared, the light of reason dimmed across the entire world. A piece of humanity's intellectual history vanished with them. Knowledge from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. Centuries of shared discoveries were wiped from the collective memory of mankind, possibly lost forever, leaving only fragments of what was once known. And this raises one of the most haunting questions in history. If those scrolls had survived, would science have advanced centuries earlier? Would humanity have understood the universe much sooner? Did humanity lose centuries of knowledge when the Library of Alexandria vanished? Despite the loss of the great library, fragments of Alexandria's legacy managed to survive. For centuries, dedicated scholars meticulously copied manuscripts, allowing ideas to travel beyond the city walls. In Rome, classical writings were preserved and studied, keeping Greek philosophy and science alive. The Byzantine world became a safe haven, where ancient texts were copied and protected for generations. Centuries later, Islamic scholars became the great guardians of antiquity, translating Greek wisdom into Arabic. Through these translations, breakthroughs in mathematics, medicine, and astronomy were carried across the Mediterranean. Yet, even with these efforts, the vast majority of Alexandria's collection was lost to time and fire. The world kept the fragments, but the complete archive of human knowledge is gone forever. The Library of Alexandria was more than a building. It was a vision of what humanity could achieve, a place where ideas from across civilizations came together. For centuries, it held the wisdom of the ancient world. Generations of thinkers contributed to its growing collection. Science, philosophy, mathematics, and medicine. Knowledge gathered from cultures across the Mediterranean. And yet, one of humanity's greatest achievements disappeared, not in a single moment, but across centuries of conflict and change. Today, only fragments of its knowledge survive, copied texts and scattered manuscripts, small pieces of a much larger intellectual treasure. The rest may be lost forever, discoveries we may never know, ideas that might have changed the course of history. The fall of Alexandria reminds us of something important. It reminds us that knowledge is truly fragile, and the survival of knowledge is never guaranteed. Even the greatest libraries can vanish, but the human search for knowledge continues. Every generation builds on the discoveries of the past, and the dream of preserving knowledge lives on. Because the story of the Library of Alexandria is not only about loss. It is a reminder of humanity's endless curiosity. It is a reminder of humanity's endless curiosity. A reminder that the pursuit of knowledge may be the greatest legacy we leave behind.